When this happened, I was 16 years old. I'm 25 now, and I'm sharing this because Halloween is coming. You need to hear this story. It might just help you stay safe. Story 1. So back in 1998, I was just 14 years old, living in Leeds, England. My life was simple back then. I loved football, my mum's shepherd's pie, and throwing sticks for our dog down at the park. But like most kids, I hated school. I couldn't stand the teachers, the noise, or the early mornings. The only thing that made it bearable was my best mate, Danny. We'd always catch the bus home together, and no matter how bad my day was, Danny always found a way to make me laugh. But that changed one day. The day Danny needed cheering up for once. Danny was one of the good ones. Never late, always did his homework, never got into trouble. Then one afternoon, everything went wrong. As he was leaving the boys' toilets, he accidentally bumped into a teacher, Mr. Carter, spilling a cup of hot tea all over his crisp white shirt. Danny apologized right away, but Carter lost it. He started shouting, acting like Danny had done it on purpose, and sent him straight to referral, which was worse than detention. Then Carter told the head teacher that Danny had deliberately thrown hot tea at him, turning the whole thing into a serious health and safety incident. The head wanted him expelled. Danny's parents begged them not to kick him out. In the end, they convinced the school to give him 2 weeks of after-school detention instead, including 2 hours every Saturday morning. They told him to just accept it, keep his head down, and move on. But his older brother Paul didn't take it so calmly. Paul was almost 3 years older than us, and he absolutely hated Mr. Carter from his own time at school. Hearing what happened to Danny drove him mad. He wanted payback, something Carter wouldn't forget. But Paul said we had to wait. Revenge is a dish best served cold, he told us. At first, I didn't understand what he meant. Then he explained, if we threw eggs at Carter's house right away, he'd know it was us. But if we waited a few months, let things cool down, and struck on a night when everyone was up to mischief, he'd never figure it out. That night would be mischief night. I didn't even know what that was until Paul told us. It's an old tradition, hundreds of years old, where kids go out the night before a big festival to pull pranks. Back in the day, they'd steal cabbages. Now it's eggs, toilet paper, and smashed pumpkins. In most places, it happens on the 30th of October, the night before Halloween. That was the night Paul picked for revenge. Paul spent weeks coming up with a plan. He didn't want to just throw eggs or spray paint Carter's house. He wanted something that would really hurt him. Carter was obsessed with classic cars, especially his pride and joy, a first series Jaguar E-Type. He kept it locked up in his garage, polished and perfect. Paul decided that's what we'd destroy. We couldn't just break in randomly. Someone would hear us. We had to be clever, quiet, and fast. For weeks, Paul's mate Marvin helped us set the stage. Every night, he'd ride his bike to Carter's house, knock loudly on the door, and speed off before Carter could catch him. Each night, Carter got angrier. By the time mischief night came around, he'd started running into the street, screaming threats at Marvin. Everything was going perfectly. The night of October 30th arrived, and I could barely focus at school. Everyone was talking about what mischief they'd get up to, and me and Danny had to act normal, pretending we weren't up to anything. When the final bell rang, my stomach twisted with nerves. On the way to the bus stop, Danny told me I was the best friend he'd ever had. Hearing that made me forget my doubts. There was no backing out now. By 7 p.m., the four of us, me, Danny, Paul, and Marvin, were hiding near Carter's house. The night air was cold, the street quiet except for the wind. Marvin crept up, banged on Carter's door, and yelled, "Catch me if you can, tosspot," before jumping on his bike and pedaling away. Carter came bursting out, furious, and jumped into his car, racing after him. We cheered quietly. It worked, but we only had maybe 15 minutes before he'd be back. We sprinted to the garage, Paul pulling out a towel and wrapping it around a small window. Danny held it in place while Paul punched through the glass. It shattered softly. He cleared the frame, laid the towel over the bottom edge, and we climbed in. The air smelled of oil and metal. Paul flicked on a small flashlight and froze. The Jaguar wasn't there. The entire garage was empty. Our stomachs dropped. All that planning, all those nights, it was useless. Paul cursed under his breath, refusing to leave empty-handed. He searched the corners of the garage, eyes darting like he was desperate. Then Danny pointed to an old green footlocker by the wall. "That," Paul said, "that's what we're taking." He spotted a pair of bolt cutters hanging nearby, grabbed them, and clipped through the padlock. The sound was sharp and echoing. When they opened the locker, it wasn't full of car parts or tools. It was filled with old white envelopes, jewelry, and a single-frame photo of a young woman. Paul picked up the picture, then a small glass jar with a lock of brown hair inside. He went pale instantly, dropped both items back into the locker, and whispered, "We need to leave." Danny didn't understand. "What are you on about? Let's at least take something." But Paul's voice turned cold. "No, Danny." Now we scrambled out the window, grabbed our bikes, and tore down the street. When we finally stopped, gasping for breath, Paul explained what he'd seen. He said he remembered that girl's face from years ago. A missing person case. A young woman who vanished up on Ilkley Moor. Her photo had been in the papers back then. The same face was in Carter's photo frame. The same brown hair, locked in that jar. Danny didn't believe him at first. "You sure, Paul?" But Paul swore he was. The girl had never been found. No body, no clue, nothing. But now we knew why. I didn't want to believe it. My brain refused to accept that our teacher, the same man who gave out homework and yelled about tardiness, might be a killer. But Paul wasn't the type to panic for nothing. We stopped at a phone box, and Paul dialed 999. He reported it anonymously, told them about the locker, the jewelry, and the hair. He gave Carter's address, hung up, and walked out without a word. My stomach was in knots. I thought we'd see police cars swarming the place, maybe even a helicopter. But nothing happened. Only a single officer showed up, knocked on Carter's door, looked around for a few minutes, and left. They must have thought it was just another prank on mischief night. That's when it hit us. By breaking in, we'd warned Carter, he had time to hide or destroy everything. If the police had raided his house unannounced, maybe they would have found it all. But we'd ruined it. He got away. For weeks afterward, I expected to hear that he'd been arrested. But instead, there was an announcement at school after Christmas. Mr. Carter was leaving, moving overseas to teach in Hong Kong. The head teacher called it a wonderful opportunity. Only me, Danny, Paul, and Marvin knew the truth. Carter wasn't leaving for adventure. He was running. Paul said Hong Kong had just been handed back to China, meaning Britain couldn't extradite anyone from there. Carter was gone, free, untouchable, and it was our fault. We'd handed him his escape. We'd tried to get revenge, and instead we'd helped a monster vanish. I still think about it even now. The guilt never really fades. Paul took it the worst. He started drinking heavily, couldn't keep a job, and by 30 he was completely lost. People thought he was just a drunk, a failure. But me and Danny knew better. The guilt, the fear, the regret, it ate him alive. And sometimes, late at night, I wonder if Mr. Carter ever looks back on what he did. Or if he's still out there, smiling in some classroom, teaching kids just like us. Story 2, I grew up in a small town called Shallow Water, about 10 miles outside of Leech, northwest Texas. When I was 19, I worked at the XFAB plant and usually got a ride to work with a few coworkers. Every morning, we stopped by this little coffee shop called Hebrews for our daily fix of caffeine. That's where I met a girl named Rita. We started chatting about donuts, what kind we liked best. And after I found out she was single, we swapped numbers and started texting. We went on a few dates through October, and near the end of the month, with Halloween coming up, I asked if she had plans. She told me she was going to a Halloween party up near the country club and said I could tag along with her and her friends if I wanted. I was crazy about her then, and since none of my buddies had any plans other than sitting home playing PUBG, I thought, why not? I pulled out my old Ghostface costume from a few years back, threw it on and headed to the party. I was ready to prove I could be social and make a good impression on her friends. For a while it was great. Music, laughter, drinks. It all felt easy and fun. But that changed fast when Rita came rushing back from the bathroom looking pale and scared. She told me her ex had shown up. He wasn't supposed to be there. He worked oil rigs out in the Gulf. Apparently something changed, and now he was back early. She said if I didn't want to get into a fight, I needed to leave. From the sound of it, her ex was the type who'd start swinging first and ask questions later. I didn't want trouble, so I said my goodbyes, gave Rita one last look, and started walking out. As I headed down the long driveway of that big house, I suddenly heard someone yell behind me, "That's right! Get the hell out of here before I kick your ass." I turned and saw some angry guy being held back by his friends, shouting all kinds of trash at me. I just shook my head and kept walking until I reached the road. My plan was simple: walk all the way back to shallow water. It'd take a couple of hours, but I didn't care. I was too wrapped up thinking about Rita to feel tired. That was until my phone buzzed. It was a text from her. She said her ex had started another fight and gotten kicked out, and now he and his buddies were furious and out looking for me. That's when my stomach dropped. They were in a car and I was on foot. It was only a matter of time before they caught up. I'd lost my ghost face mask at the party, but I was still wearing that ragged black gown as I started jogging along the dark highway. It probably looked ridiculous, but I didn't care. I just wanted to get as far away as possible. Every car that passed made me nervous. I kept glancing over my shoulder, praying none of them were Rita's ex. Most of them sped by, headlights fading into the dark, until one slowed down beside me. My heart stopped. I turned expecting a car full of drunk guys ready to beat me up. Instead, it was a lone woman in an SUV. She rolled down the window and called out, asking if I needed a ride. She looked like your average soccer mom: purple sweater, neat hair, calm smile. She said if I was running by the road this late, I probably needed a lift. I told her she was a lifesaver, the kindest person in the world right then. After confirming she was headed my way, I got in. She introduced herself as Deborah. As we drove, she asked why I was running in a Halloween costume. I didn't know what else to say, so I told her the truth. I told her about Rita, her ex showing up, how I was running because he was out looking for me. Deborah laughed and said, "Well, that's what you get for messing around in the dating pool." I laughed too and told her she wasn't wrong. But when she said I should find a nice girl and settle down, I just smiled politely. Getting married at 19 sounded awful. She laughed like she knew I'd say that. We drove and talked for a while, and I told her I lived in shallow water. She said she was heading that way too. But when she turned off the highway and started driving down a dark dirt road going east, I got confused. I reminded her where I was headed, and she said she hadn't forgotten. She just needed to stop at a friend's house first. I didn't think much of it. She was giving me a free ride, so I didn't want to seem ungrateful. But then, out of nowhere, she slowed to a stop in the middle of the road. The air went heavy. I asked why we stopped, but she didn't answer. Instead, she reached into the side of her door. Then she pointed a gun at me. I froze. My mind went blank. Deborah tossed a small black cloth sack at me and told me to put it over my head. I laughed nervously, thinking it was some kind of twisted joke. but her face didn't change. Then she said, calm but sharp, that if I didn't do it, she'd shoot me in the head and tell the cops I tried to violate her. I couldn't move, couldn't think. When she shouted again, "Are you deaf? Put it on before I shoot you dead." I did what she said. I slid the bag over my head, heart pounding so hard it hurt. The car started moving again, and I sat there nearly blind, asking where she was taking me, what she was going to do. Her voice changed, lower, angry, like something unhinged. She said, "Quiet, demon. I don't have ears for your lies." That's what she kept calling me, a demon. I could barely breathe when she finally stopped the car and told me to get out. She kept the gun pressed to my back as she guided me somewhere, my feet crunching over dirt and hay until I realized we were inside a barn. She tied my wrists to something cold, metal, maybe a support beam, and then pulled the bag off my head. The dim light showed hay bales, old tools, and Deborah's face, twisted in some strange mix of fear and devotion. She said if I did anything, she'd shoot me when she came back. Then she left. I don't know how long I stood there, wrists aching, trying not to lose it. When she came back, she wasn't alone. There was a little girl with her, maybe 10 years old, who looked terrified. Deborah still had the gun in her hand. She told the girl that I was a demon in human skin, that if they prayed hard enough, I'd reveal my true face. I tried everything, begging, explaining, praying myself. But she wouldn't listen. The more I talked, the louder she prayed. And when I shouted, she shouted louder, until the whole barn echoed with madness. Then she told her daughter to look at me, to see the demon for herself. The girl just stared at me, trembling, and then whispered, "I don't see a demon, Mommy." Deborah frowned, confused, then told her to look again. But the girl shook her head and said it again, louder. I saw something break in Deborah's eyes. She looked at me, really looked. And for the first time, she seemed uncertain. Her expression softened, and her voice trembled as she said, "Mommy made a mistake." I latched onto that, nodding, agreeing like crazy. "Yes, a mistake. Everyone makes mistakes. Please, just let me go." I was shaking, begging, crying. Deborah didn't respond. Her daughter's eyes were glassy with tears, her hands shaking. Deborah kept apologizing, saying she was sorry, that she thought she was doing God's work. She told her daughter to go back inside. I stood there in silence until Deborah came back again, holding the gun in that same black sack. This time I felt weirdly relieved. The bag meant she wasn't going to shoot me, at least not yet. She started rambling about how God gave her signs to hunt demons, how sometimes she got it wrong, but she always tried to do His will. She said she'd let me go if I swore never to tell anyone what happened. I swore it. I'd have said anything. So she tied the bag over my head again, untied my wrists, and guided me outside. I stumbled along until she shoved me back into the car. When she finally took the bag off, we were parked on a dark stretch of highway. She said it was close to where she'd pick me up. I didn't care. I was just glad to be alive. Before she drove away, she looked at me and said, "God bless you. You'll be rewarded in heaven if you keep quiet." Then she sped off into the night. I didn't keep quiet. I walked all the way back to Shallow Water and called the county sheriff. I told him everything, but it didn't go how I thought. Without witnesses or proof, it turned into my word against hers. Deborah claimed she'd given a drunk kid a ride home, that I'd tried to attack her when she stopped to offer me food. And yeah, I'd been drinking that night, which made things worse. The cops said that even if they charged her, she could claim self-defense and walk away free. In the end, they told me, maybe don't get in cars with strangers next time. I decided not to press charges. It wasn't worth dragging my name through the mud for nothing. Rita thought I was insane not to, until I explained that Deborah, if that was even her real name, could twist it all and make me look like the bad guy. This was just before social media really blew up, but the thought of people seeing my name and thinking I was some creep, I couldn't do it. Sometimes, though, I wish I had, because every so often I get this sick feeling that Deborah didn't stop with me, that maybe someone else got in her car, trusting her like I did, and never made it out alive. Story 3. So I'm Italian-American on both sides of my family, and my dad's side has lived in Brooklyn since the 1930s. My grandpa, Luca, came to the U.S. by ship when he was in his 20s. For as long as I can remember, he was the most devoted Catholic I've ever known. He always carried his rosary, never missed Sunday Mass or confession, and would sprinkle holy water in his bedroom every night before bed to keep evil spirits away. But there was one part of his faith that he completely ignored, the idea of making a pilgrimage. My grandmother would always brag about visiting the sanctuary of the Madonna Dorito in Monsantangelo, but Grandpa Luca wanted nothing to do with going back to Italy. I remember once asking him why. Why wouldn't a man so proud of his roots and culture ever want to see his homeland again? He told me that as much as he disliked certain things about America, it was a place where the things of the old world couldn't follow him. I never understood what that meant. I wondered if it was heartbreak, debt, or maybe something darker that made him leave. But one day when I was finally old enough, he decided to tell me the story, and that's when I realized why he had stayed silent about it for so long. Grandpa Luca was born in 1911, and by the time he was 11 years old, Mussolini had taken power. He grew up in a poor part of southern Italy, where the fascists had strong support. When he turned 17, he proudly enlisted in one of Mussolini's elite paramilitary groups. I won't name which one, it doesn't matter, but it was a brutal, fanatical organization known for its secret prisons. Back then, the dictatorship made people disappear, writers, teachers, rebels, and they needed hidden prisons scattered across the countryside to make them vanish. Grandpa never imagined he'd be guarding prisoners instead of serving his country in glory. But soon enough, that's what he was doing, standing watch over poets, priests, and partisans. When he proved himself capable, they moved him to a high-security prison where the worst prisoners were kept. Some were violent rebels who had taken up arms against the regime. Others, though, were much stranger. You see, the fascists worked closely with the Catholic Church. The Church publicly supported Mussolini, and in return, the fascists used their power to silence the Church's enemies. But enemies, as it turned out, didn't always mean rebels or atheists. It also meant cults, people practicing faith in ways the Church didn't control. Now, when you think of cults, you probably picture something terrifying like Jonestown or Waco. But back then, not all cults were evil. Some simply worshiped local saints or practiced extreme devotion through things like self-punishment. But if the Church didn't approve of how they did it, it became a sin. The Church couldn't arrest them directly, but the fascists could. So instead of guarding violent criminals, Grandpa often found himself watching over fragile old priests or hermits who had done nothing but pray the wrong way. He said he'd see them dragged in, broken and bleeding, and he couldn't understand why. Then one day, everything changed. They brought in a man with no name. Every prisoner gave up a name eventually, even if it was fake, but not him. When asked, he said, "I don't have a name." He was rail thin, with long black hair and a cold emptiness in his eyes. They said he led a cult that practiced blood rituals on All Hallows Eve. Even after torture, he never screamed, never begged. Because of that, they locked him away alone in solitary confinement. That's when my grandpa began to understand why the place felt cursed. The man with no name had an aura about him that made people sick. No one wanted to go near his cell. The guards whispered that he wasn't human, that he'd done unspeakable things in the name of his strange god. The prison itself was already a cruel place, but even monsters need distractions to stay sane. So the guards allowed small comforts like cigarettes, card games, and makeshift soccer matches. Even those in solitary could request something to keep their minds from breaking. When the man with no name was asked what he wanted, he didn't ask for a book, a ball, or a Bible. He said he wanted a rock and a piece of sandpaper. At first, everyone thought it was harmless. The warden approved it, as long as nothing sharp was involved. So a guard brought him a small stone and a strip of sandpaper. Days turned into weeks, and each time a guard passed by, they noticed the stone changing shape. What started as a rough, jagged piece of rock became smoother, rounder, and oddly symmetrical, like an oversized pillar egg. The guards joked about it, But there was nothing funny about what happened next. The more he shaped the rock, the worse the prison became. Prisoners grew restless, violent, and hungry for chaos. They started demanding more food and freedom, threatening riots. The guards beat them, starved them, tried everything. But the rage only spread. By late October, it was pure madness. They screamed about freedom every night, filling the air with chanting and bloodlust. On the night before Halloween, the warden gathered everyone in the courtyard. He told them that if they stopped their protests, they'd get fresh bread and wine for All Hallows' Eve. He thought that would calm them. It didn't. Instead, it enraged them. That night, all hell broke loose. The prison erupted in a full-blown riot. Grandpa said he'd never seen violence like it before or after. It was as if every man inside had lost his mind. They weren't just attacking guards. They were tearing each other apart. The walls echoed with screams. Blood splattered across the courtyard. By dawn, the guards had pulled back and surrounded the compound, shooting anyone who tried to escape. When the sun finally rose, the riot was over. But what was left inside wasn't human. Bodies covered the ground. Pools of blood shimmered in the cold morning light. Some prisoners had returned to their cells, shaking or half dead. Others lay motionless, missing limbs or worse. But when the guards counted everyone, they realized someone was missing. Only one cell was empty, the man with no names. Grandpa said he corrected himself after calling it empty because technically it wasn't. Lying in the center of the floor was another prisoner, someone completely unrelated, his chest ripped open and his heart missing. The man with no name was gone. They searched the entire prison but found nothing. No sign of escape, no broken bars, no tunnels. It was as if he had simply vanished. A full investigation followed, and the warden accused the guards of helping him escape. But no one confessed. Eventually, the warden filed an official report claiming the man had died during the riot, and his remains were too mutilated to identify. It was easier to explain a death than a disappearance. But the guards knew the truth. The man hadn't died. He had completed something. They whispered that the unrest began the moment he started shaping that rock, and that it reached its peak when he finished. On the morning of October 31st, he completed it, a small, perfect figure of a man. Hours later, the massacre began. The warden ordered silence. Anyone who spoke about it was threatened. None of the guards were allowed to transfer or quit. My grandpa realized then that if he didn't leave soon, he'd never leave alive. So he deserted. He snuck into France and boarded a ship to America by early December. That Christmas, he sat alone in New York, cold and unable to speak English. But he didn't care. Because here, in this new world, the things from the old world couldn't follow him. Story 4, I could get in serious trouble for sharing this, so I want to stay anonymous. I'm not giving out my real name or where this happened. Please understand that. You'll know why by the time you finish hearing this. I'm a teacher in an English-speaking country, and I work with kids between 7 and 11 years old. I've been doing this job for several years now, and honestly, I love it. I wouldn't change a thing. Teaching has its high moments, those moments that make you proud, make you laugh, make you feel like you're doing something that matters. But then there are the lows, the kind that crawl under your skin and never leave, the kind that follow you home no matter how much you try to forget. You see, when you work with children, you sometimes see things most people never do. You witness innocence, wonder, and sometimes darkness. It happened at the start of a new school term. There was a new student in my class. Let's call him A. He had just moved to our country from a non-English speaking place, and at first communication was tough, but he was a fast learner. After a few weeks of extra English lessons, he started picking things up quickly. His personality began to shine through, and he was just one of those sweet, curious kids who wanted to understand everything around him. Now, A came from a very traditional background, one where people truly believed in spirits, curses, and evil forces. Halloween wasn't a thing in his home country, not like it is here anyway. So when October came, and the classrooms filled with fake cobwebs, jack-o'-lanterns, and paper bats, A was confused and scared. He thought we were doing something dangerous. But after we explained that Halloween here is just a fun tradition, where we take the things that scare us and turn them into fun, he started to enjoy it. My students were amazing that term. They welcomed A with kindness. Sure, they asked innocent, awkward questions about his accent and where he came from, but never in a mean way. And soon, A became one of the most popular kids in the class. His classmates taught him about vampires, zombies, ghosts, and all kinds of monsters. But the one creature that fascinated him most was Dracula. When I asked him why, he smiled and said he liked the idea of staying up all night and turning into something that could fly, like a bat. It was so cute watching him laugh, play, and talk about vampires with that spark in his eyes. Halloween fell on a Friday that year. After lunch, we had a small costume party in class. The kids wore masks, painted their faces, and we turned the classroom into a haunted den of laughter. A wore a black trash bag as a cape and a pair of cheap plastic vampire fangs I had given him. He crept around, hissing at his classmates, pretending to bite them, and they couldn't stop laughing. He was happy, really happy. When it was time to go home, he asked if he could keep his fangs and cape on. I said, sure, why not? I remember thinking how adorable it was. That weekend, I told my boyfriend about his new obsession with vampires. We both laughed about how kids can find magic in the strangest things. I couldn't wait for Monday to see if A was still pretending to be a little vampire. But Monday came, and A wasn't at school. I figured he was just sick. The headmaster called his parents to check, and they said he had caught something and needed rest. No big deal. But Tuesday came, and still no A. Wednesday, Thursday, nothing. After a week of absence, we started to get worried. The headmaster called again, and his parents said A was still resting. Their English wasn't great, but we understood enough. When the second week came and went, the school contacted social services. The headmaster said something felt off. 2 weeks later, a social worker finally went to the family's home. She asked to see A, but his parents refused. They said he was sleeping, that he needed rest. The social worker warned them that she could return with the police if they didn't let her in, but they wouldn't listen. By the third week, authorities finally got a warrant. When they entered the home, what they found was horrifying. A was lying in bed, barely alive, his skin pale, his body thin like a skeleton. It looked like his parents had tried to care for him, but something was very wrong. He was rushed to the hospital immediately. The doctors were shocked. He hadn't eaten for almost 3 weeks. They realized he wasn't sick. He was starving.
When the police questioned his parents, they seemed heartbroken, genuinely confused about what they had done wrong. They said they were only following the advice of a holy man. According to them, A had been possessed by a dark spirit ever since Halloween. They said he had changed, that his obsession with Dracula was proof that something evil had entered him. The holy man had told them that the only way to drive the demon out was to starve it. So they did. They fed A only enough water to keep him alive, hoping the spirit inside him would die first. And when that didn't work, they called the holy man again to perform an exorcism. It wasn't like the movies, no holy water or chanting priests, just a quiet ritual, whispered prayers, incense, and fear. They said it didn't work, and A grew weaker and weaker. Hearing that made my blood run cold. I couldn't stop picturing his tiny body lying there, still believing something evil had taken hold of him. A's parents were arrested and charged. They didn't serve long sentences, but they did go to prison. A was taken in by foster parents somewhere else in the country. I never saw him again. I still remember how excited I was that Monday morning, waiting for him to come back, still playing vampire. I never imagined I'd never see his little smile again. Hey friends, thanks for listening. Click that notification bell so you never miss a story. I post new videos every Monday and Thursday at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and we have creepy live streams every Sunday and Wednesday night. If you've got your own story, send it to letsreadsubmissions@gmail.com, and maybe it'll be featured next. And if you want to support me more, check out my Patreon or hit that big join button for early access and bonus content. You can also find my true crime channel, Saturn Soul, and my podcast, Where All These Stories Live. All the links are in the description below. Thanks again, friends. And remember, sometimes the scariest things aren't in stories. See you next time. Story 1. Deadbolt. This happened when I was really young. So young that I barely remember most of it. I was probably around 5 or 6 years old. What I do remember comes in flashes and pieces, and the rest of the story I learned later from my parents. So, what I'm about to tell you is everything, what I remember and what they told me. At the time, we lived in an old farmhouse that my parents were renting. They didn't have much money back then, and this place was cheap. The landlord owned a few small properties around the area, and we were just lucky to have a roof over our heads. My dad worked long hours at the steel mill, mostly the midnight shift. That detail matters, because if things had gone differently that night, I probably wouldn't be here to tell this story. It started with screaming. My mom said it was the kind of scream that cuts straight into your chest. "Help! He's going to rape me! Help me!" Both of my parents shot out of bed instantly. I was sleeping between them that night because I'd been having terrible nightmares for weeks. My dad, who had just switched from night shifts to daytime, jumped up and grabbed the nearest thing he could find. A fire poker from the living room. He crept toward the front door, moving carefully, his heart pounding. The voice outside screamed again, "Help! Please, he's coming!" It sounded like a woman crying so hard she could barely speak.
My mom, who's the kind of person that always helps anyone in need, reached for the deadbolt. "We have to help her," she said, but my dad grabbed her arm before she could unlock it. He didn't say much, just gave her a sharp look and whispered, "Wait." Then he raised his voice and called through the door, "Who's out there? What's going on? Who's after you?" The woman's voice came back, frantic and shaking. "Please, he's coming. I need to get in before he finds me." Her sobs grew louder, desperate, pitiful. My dad turned on the porch light. "Stay right there on the porch," he said, "with your back against the door. You'll be safe there. I'm opening the deadbolt, but not the chain." He slid open the deadbolt just enough to slip a brick, one we usually use to keep the door open, through the gap. "Here," he said, "use this if you need to protect yourself. I'll be right here on the other side of the door. If anyone comes, I'll handle it. The police are on their way." That's when everything changed. The woman suddenly started screaming, not for help this time, but in pure rage. She threw her body against the door so hard that it shook the frame. "What the hell is wrong with you? Let me in this goddamn house right now," she shrieked. My dad slammed the door shut and locked it again. The sound of her fists hitting the wood echoed through the whole house. My mom clutched me so tightly I could feel her heart pounding. My dad grabbed the phone and called the police. By the time they arrived about 10 minutes later, the woman was gone. Just gone. The brick was sitting on one of the porch steps like she had placed it there carefully before disappearing into the night. My parents gave the police every detail they could remember. The woman's voice, her height, her tone, the way she screamed. After that, things were tense for a while. My parents checked every door and window multiple times every night. I didn't really understand what had happened back then. I just remember feeling scared and confused, wondering why my parents hadn't helped that woman. I thought maybe the man she was running from had caught her while we were calling the police. For days, I couldn't sleep. Then a few days later, my dad's brother-in-law, who worked in law enforcement, told us something terrifying. The police had gotten another call, same story, same woman, just a few streets over. But this time, they already had a patrol car nearby. The officers showed up quietly, no sirens, no lights, and they caught her in the act. She was at the door of another house, crying for help, just like before. But when the officers started walking toward her, a man suddenly jumped out of the bushes next to the porch. He tried to run, but they caught him quickly. When they searched the area, they found a long kitchen knife hidden in the bushes, right where he'd been waiting. It turned out the woman and the man were working together. The woman would cry for help to get people to open their doors, and as soon as they did, the man would rush in. God only knows what they planned to do once they got inside. When my parents told me all this years later, the memory hit me like a wave. I remembered that night so clearly. The fear, the banging, the way my dad's voice shook when he told my mom not to open the door. I realized then that if my dad had still been working the midnight shift, or if he had been too tired to wake up, we might have died that night. My dad grew up in Gary, Indiana, in a really rough neighborhood, so he always had this instinct to be careful, to question everything. As a kid, I used to find that annoying. I didn't understand why he was so suspicious all the time, but after hearing what could have happened, I understood completely. That one moment, his hesitation, his caution, might have saved our lives. Every time I think back to that night, I still feel the chill crawl up my spine, remembering that voice outside the door, begging to come in, and wondering what might have happened if my mom had reached the lock a second faster. Story 2, Trick-or-Treater. This happened on a small Norwegian peninsula when I was around 15 years old. It must have been sometime around 2006, maybe a year before or after. It was Halloween night, but I didn't really have any plans. I was too old to go trick-or-treating and too young to go to any parties. Besides, our peninsula was small and quiet. Not much ever happened there. So I stayed home playing RuneScape on my old desktop computer. That's how I spent most of my evenings back then, completely lost in that game. I had the lights turned off, which wasn't great for my eyes, but I liked the dark atmosphere it created. Around 9 p.m., my mom came into my room and tapped me on the shoulder. "Didn't you hear me?" I said. "I'm going out for 20 minutes, she said. I had my noise-canceling headphones on, so I hadn't heard her at all. She went downstairs, and a moment later, I heard the front door slam shut. I put my headphones back on and dove right back into my little pixelated world. I don't know how long I'd been playing when it happened. My bedroom door was wide open, and from where I sat, I could see straight down the hallway to my mom's room. Since all the lights were off, everything was covered in deep shadows. After staring at the bright computer screen for so long, my eyes had to adjust before I could even make out the faint outlines of furniture and door frames. Before that, it was just total darkness. Then I started to feel strange. You know that gut feeling when your body senses something before your mind figures it out? That creeping feeling that someone's watching you? That's what hit me. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I thought maybe my mom had come back and I just hadn't noticed because of my headphones. But if she was home, why hadn't she turned on any lights? I looked toward the hallway, squinting into the dark. That's when I saw it, something glowing at the far end. A bright fluorescent green light, like a floating orb. My heart stopped. I ripped off my headphones and stared, frozen. As my eyes adjusted, I realized it wasn't an orb at all. It had 2 black holes where eyes should be, and a dark slit for a mouth. It was a glow-in-the-dark mask. Someone was wearing it. The glowing face was turned straight toward me. I couldn't see the rest of the person's body, just that eerie, glowing mask slowly inching closer. The face had this strange, emotionless look. It wasn't smiling or frowning, just blank. I'll never forget that image. It's burned into my memory. The moment the person realized I'd seen them, they froze. For several seconds, we just stared at each other through the darkness. Then, the masked figure slowly raised a finger to its lips. "I'm just a trick-or-treater," a man's voice said, deep, calm, and unfamiliar. It didn't sound like anyone I knew. My voice came out small and shaky as I muttered, "So, trick or treat?" He didn't answer. I whispered, "Neither. Please go now." But instead of leaving, the glowing face began moving toward me again, step by step, getting closer down the hallway. Panic exploded through me. I jumped up, slammed my bedroom door shut, and locked it as fast as I could. Then I threw all my weight against it. I could hear his heavy breathing on the other side of the door. The handle rattled once, then again, harder this time. His breathing grew louder, rough and angry. Then after a few seconds of silence, I heard fast footsteps going down the stairs and the sound of the front door opening and closing. I stayed frozen against the door, listening, not daring to move. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the lock. I sat there for what felt like forever, sobbing quietly, too terrified to check if he was gone. When my mom finally came home, I nearly collapsed. It felt like hours had passed. She saw my face and immediately started asking what was wrong, why I was crying, and why there was a large burlap sack lying in the hallway. That was when I completely broke down and told her everything. About the glowing mask, the man's voice, the breathing, all of it. She didn't waste a second and called the police. They came to check the house and the surrounding area but didn't find anyone. I've tried to tell myself that maybe it was just some twisted Halloween prank, some sick person trying to scare kids. But something about it felt too real, too personal. The image of that glowing, floating mask still haunts me. What really unsettled me was how small our community was. Everyone knew everyone there. Seeing a face I didn't recognize was almost impossible. That means whoever that was, whoever stood in that hallway watching me, I probably knew them. Maybe even saw them afterward, pretending like nothing had ever happened. The thought that they chose my house, my room, specifically, makes my skin crawl. After that night, I never felt safe there again. It's one of the main reasons I left the peninsula when I turned 18. Story 3. Guest List. It was late October in Sofia, Bulgaria. That year, Halloween fell on a Saturday, and my friend Minko was throwing a massive party at his parents' apartment. Now, this guy was rich by Bulgarian standards, born into money, so when I say apartment, don't imagine a small, shabby flat. Think more like one of those giant, picture-perfect apartments you see in American sitcoms. His parents had gone away for the weekend, probably to Spain or Italy, somewhere warm and far away, which meant the party was bound to get wild. When the night finally came, I put on my zombie costume and set out to meet my friends. Minko's invite said the party started at 8 o'clock, but being teenagers, we decided to show up fashionably late, around 10 o'clock. When we arrived, the place was already packed. Music was blasting, people were dancing, and the vodka was flowing like water. The punch bowl on the table was massive and probably only 10% juice, knowing Minko. Some of us had exams coming up, so we didn't want to go too crazy. We just stuck to a few beers while everyone else dove into the punch like there was no tomorrow. Other than my classmates, there was one person at the party who stood out, a guy in a full wolfman mask. He didn't seem to know anyone, just stood near the punch bowl, quiet and awkward. Part of me wanted to go say hi, maybe make him feel welcome, but my shy side won, and I just left him alone. As the night went on, things started to take a strange turn. One of the party guests suddenly complained about stomach pain. I figured he'd just had too much to drink. But then he started vomiting, and soon after, another person did too. Then another. Within minutes, nearly a dozen people were clutching their stomachs, groaning in pain. Some were even throwing up on the floor. That's when someone finally called for medical help. At the hospital, we found out it wasn't bad alcohol. It was the punch. Someone had slipped rat poison into it. The dosage wasn't enough to kill instantly, but without treatment, it could have been fatal in a few hours. The thought of what could have happened still makes me sick. If no one had called for help, people could have died without even realizing they'd been poisoned. Luckily, everyone recovered after being hospitalized. When the police questioned us, I mentioned the guy in the wolfman mask. He had been hanging around the punch bowl all night, and something about him just didn't feel right. I told the officers that someone at the party must have known him, but when I talked to my friends later, it turned out nobody did. Everyone thought he was someone else's friend and didn't bother asking. No one had spoken to him. No one saw him without his mask. No one even remembered when he showed up or when he left. He had just appeared out of nowhere and disappeared just as quietly. The police tried to investigate but didn't find much. It seemed like some random act of cruelty, someone just trying to hurt people for no reason. But people like that don't usually stop after one time. And sure enough, almost exactly 1 year later, on the next Halloween weekend, it happened again at another party across town. The same poison punch, only this time the dose was higher. 3 people nearly died that night, and 10 more were rushed to the hospital. But this time, someone caught him in the act. A party-goer tackled the man while he was pouring something into the punch bowl. When the police unmasked him, it turned out he was completely unhinged. He said he was inspired by something called the Jonestown Massacre, an event from the 1970s where over 300 people died after drinking poison punch. That psycho wanted to honor it by recreating it on Halloween. For the first time in my life, I was genuinely thankful for exams. If I hadn't been pacing myself that night, I might have been one of the ones rushed to the hospital, or worse. These days, whenever Minko throws a Halloween party, he personally checks under every guest's mask at the door to make sure they're on the list. A few years later, my aunt and her husband hired me to babysit for them over Halloween weekend. They were going to a party and would be back before 11 p.m. Their baby Josh was only 10 months old, an easy kid. He rarely cried and was always happy. I arrived, they left, and the night was calm. Just a few trick-or-treaters at the door, nothing weird. I kept the baby monitor with me and checked on Josh every 10 minutes. I know it sounds paranoid, but I just wanted to be careful. By 11:30, my aunt and uncle still weren't home. I was watching a Nicolas Cage movie, fighting to stay awake, but I eventually drifted off. When I woke up, it was almost midnight. I picked up the baby monitor and noticed something strange. Josh wasn't crying. I could hear him breathing softly. But there was another sound, a slow, steady creak, like someone walking on the floorboards. My stomach dropped. He couldn't have gotten out of his crib. Right? I called out softly, "Joshy, I'm coming up now." My voice trembled. I climbed the stairs and found him sleeping peacefully, everything perfectly normal. Still, I stayed with him until his parents came home. When they finally pulled into the driveway, I went down to greet them. But instead of saying hello, my uncle asked, "Why is the spare key in the door?" My heart stopped. We went outside, and there it was, a spare key stuck in the lock. They had both forgotten they'd left one under the doormat. The door was unlocked. My uncle ran inside and searched the house, but whoever had been there was already gone. I never heard a thing. Months later, police busted a human trafficking ring in our area. They sold women, children, even babies, to anyone who'd pay. My uncle's friend on the force told us it was likely the same group. They must have been watching the house, waiting for the right moment, waiting for the baby to be left alone. That Halloween night, they tried to take him. I still thank God every day that I woke up when I did. If not for that baby monitor, I might have never seen Josh again. Another Halloween during college, I went to a house party. It was crowded, loud, and packed with people in costumes. In the middle of the chaos, there was this guy in a giant bunny suit sitting on the couch, completely still. He didn't talk, didn't move, just sat there staring at the people dancing. At first, I thought he was some creep checking out the girls, but as the night went on, he still didn't move an inch. When I asked the host who he was, they said they didn't really know, just thought he was someone's friend. Apparently, he'd been sitting there for hours. Finally, the host walked up to him and tried talking. No response. He nudged him. Still nothing. So he pulled off the guy's bunny mask, and everyone froze. The man's face was pale, foam around his mouth, eyes rolled back. He was dead. He'd overdosed on something hours ago, and no one noticed. We had been dancing and drinking just a few feet away while his body sat there, lifeless in that costume. It messed with my head for a long time after that. The people who knew him were devastated, blaming themselves for not noticing sooner. If someone had just realized what was happening, maybe they could have saved him. I'm not trying to make this sound like a lecture, but seriously, party responsibly this Halloween. Hey guys, Lazy here. Thank you so much for listening. First off, happy Halloween to all my subscribers. I hope your night goes smoothly, if that's even a word. If you enjoyed this Halloween special, make sure to hit that like button. No, smash it, or I'll smash you. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already, so you'll get notified when my next video drops, which should be very soon. Until then, enjoy this spooky season, stay safe, and remember, the best things happen in the dark. Happy Halloween. It was late October when my girlfriend Stacy and I went on a road trip to Stowe, Vermont. We rented a small cabin from a site called Glamping Hub, just a 20-minute drive from the village. It was on a hilltop surrounded by colorful fall trees. That was the whole reason for our trip. We booked it from Thursday night to Sunday. The place had one of those keypad locks, and the owner sent me the code before we arrived. It worked perfectly. When we stepped inside, the cabin was warm and cozy. Everything from the floor to the ceiling was made of wood. It had this old country charm and even a distinct smell, like pine and smoke mixed together. It felt exactly how you'd imagine a quiet cabin in the woods would feel. There was a small kitchen, one bathroom, 3 bedrooms, and a comfy living room. Plenty of space for the two of us. The master bedroom and the living room both had TVs, and we were happy to see the place was well kept. But there was one thing that stood out: a locked door at the end of the hallway. We figured it was just the 3rd bedroom mentioned in the ad, though we couldn't understand why it was locked. Maybe the owner stored some personal things there. It didn't bother us much. We put our bags in the 2nd bedroom, wanting to keep the master room nice and tidy. Since we got there late on Thursday, we went straight out to dinner in the village, walked around for a bit, then headed back and watched a movie before going to bed. Friday was gray and cold. We decided to hike a few dirt trails nearby, surrounded by trees with leaves that looked like fire in the mist. It was peaceful. When we came back, I showered and changed while Stacy sat in the living room. When I came out, she looked uneasy. She said she heard something inside the locked room, like a faint voice or a radio playing. I went up and pressed my ear against the door. Nothing. Just silence. I knocked, partly to tease her, but she told me to stop. She hated how calm I was about it, but I laughed it off. Later, when she went to shower, I sat in the living room flipping through channels. That's when I heard it again. This faint, muffled voice coming from the locked room. I muted the TV and leaned close to the door. It really did sound like someone whispering or talking quietly. I texted the cabin owner, then called him. He said he wasn't sure why the door was locked. His wife must have left something inside. As for the sound, he said he'd have to ask her. I decided not to tell Stacy about hearing it again. She was already nervous, and I didn't want to ruin the night. We went to a nice restaurant in town called Harrison's, then took a drive through the countryside. Later, the owner called me back. His wife said she hadn't locked anything in there and had no idea what the noise could be. He offered to come by and unlock it himself. I agreed, and Stacy and I started heading back to the cabin. When we got there, she flopped onto the couch, exhausted. I went to the hallway, curious, and pressed my ear to the door again. The faint sound was still there. Something in me said to check outside. I walked out into the cold air and went around the cabin. The window to that locked room had no curtains. I stood on my toes and peered in. My heart stopped. Inside, under the dim yellow light, was a tall, thin man, pale, gaunt, and wearing a dark hoodie. He was moving slowly, dancing in the middle of the room. In his hand was a small radio playing the faint, scratchy sound we'd been hearing. The second his eyes met mine, he froze. Then he smiled. I screamed for Stacy, yelling for her to get out of the house. She came running, panicked. I told her to get in the car. We grabbed our bags, left everything else behind, and sped off into the night. I called the host, shouting that someone was inside the locked room. He said he'd call the police right away. About an hour later, he called me back. The police checked the cabin but said no one was inside. Still, they found several empty chip bags hidden under the bed. Someone had clearly been living in there. We went back only to collect what we left behind and got a refund. We didn't stay another night. Instead, we checked into a nearby motel and tried to forget, but I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that tall, sickly figure in the window, swaying back and forth with that eerie grin. Knowing he'd been there the whole time, while we ate, while we slept, still makes my skin crawl. It happened after another late October night, a rainy Friday, halfway through the month. Drinks were flowing, and I was at a Halloween-themed housewarming party with friends. I didn't wear a costume. I had just come straight from work, exhausted from my hospital shift. To stay awake, I popped an Adderall and picked up a pack of White Claws on the way. The party was crowded, maybe 25 or 30 people. I chatted, met a few new faces, but deep down, I just wanted my bed. After a couple of hours, I quietly slipped out through the backyard to avoid a long round of goodbyes. I know I shouldn't have driven after drinking, but I just wanted to go home. The rain tapped against the windshield, and I didn't even bother with music, just the sound of the storm and my tires on wet pavement. Then, in the glow of the streetlights, I saw her, a girl walking alone in the rain. No umbrella, no coat, nothing. She stopped and looked at my car as I slowed down. I hesitated but finally rolled down my window and asked if she needed a ride. Without a word, she opened the back door and climbed in. I asked where she was headed, and she said, "Just down to the end of this road." Her voice was soft, calm. I started driving, and after a few seconds, I asked why she was out in the rain. "I was in a hurry," she said. "Didn't want to call a cab." I made a joke about how expensive rides are these days. She smiled faintly and said, "I'm Allie. Thanks for picking me up." I told her my name was Jake, and that was the last thing either of us said. We drove in silence for a while. I saw a dead-end sign up ahead and asked, "Is it past the dead end?" She didn't answer. I looked in the rearview mirror and froze. The back seat was empty. My chest tightened as I slammed the brakes. I turned around. No one was there. I got out, shouting her name, checking the ground, the seats, everywhere. But there was nothing. The seat was completely dry. She hadn't even left a drop of water behind. Then I noticed the fence beside me. Beyond it, illuminated faintly by a flickering streetlight, was a cemetery. And it hit me. When I asked where she was going, she said, "Down to the end of this road." I stared at the gravestones in the rain until my skin prickled with fear. Then I got back in the car, made a quick turn, and drove home trembling. I wasn't drunk enough to hallucinate. Whatever, or whoever I had picked up that night, she didn't belong among the living. Last October, my friends and I, Joe, Carl, and Cody, went to a haunted corn maze in Oak Hill, Ohio. It was supposed to be the scariest one in the area. Out of respect for the family who runs it, I'll leave the name out. While waiting in line, we overheard some teens talking about how the maze had shut down the year before because a worker accidentally hurt someone. Supposedly, an actor in costume had shoved a visitor, and they had to close for the night. That rumor alone made the experience seem creepier, like we might get more than just jump scares. When we finally got in, it felt normal. Twisting paths, fake spider webs, sudden screams from hidden actors, eerie sound effects from hidden speakers. It was all fun until we reached a split. Two paths. One had a sign that said, "This way to safety." The other said, "Danger, keep out." Naturally, we decided to split up. Cody and I went down the safe path, expecting it to be the scarier one. We turned a corner and saw a man standing there, holding a pumpkin. His outfit was strange, all black, with a white mask covering his entire face. It had only 2 eye holes. No mouth, no nose, nothing. He didn't jump out or shout like the others. He just stood there, motionless, then slowly held out the pumpkin and said in a deep, raspy voice, "Take it." Please, at first we laughed. It seemed like part of the act. But when we tried to walk past him, he followed us, repeating the same words. "Take it, take it." His voice got lower, harsher. Then he said, "Take it, or I'll kill you." That stopped us cold. I grabbed the pumpkin just to end it, and he stopped following. Later, we ran into Joe and Carl where the two paths rejoined. They laughed when they saw me still holding the pumpkin. We decided to keep it. It made for a weird souvenir. But soon after, another worker broke character and came up to me. He said, "You can't take that pumpkin." I told him a guy in a mask gave it to me. When I described the man, his face went pale. Without a word, he turned and hurried toward the direction I'd pointed. We eventually reached the end of the maze. Under better light, I noticed the top of the pumpkin was loose. I lifted it off and froze. Inside were what looked like small, pale pieces of meat. When I picked one up, my stomach dropped. It was a severed human finger. There were more inside, maybe 10. On the side of the pumpkin, drawn in black marker, were 2 eyes and the words, "Always watching," followed by a smiley face. We screamed and ran to the nearest staff member, but she was just a teenager. She called her boss, who called the police. They shut the whole place down while officers searched the grounds. They took the pumpkin for evidence, and though we never heard anything else about it, I doubt they ever found whose fingers those were. We left shaken, but safe. Still, every October since then, whenever I see a jack-o'-lantern glowing in the dark, I can't help but think of that night, and the man in the blank white mask who whispered, "Take it."